I need a doctor, not a resident, a real one.
Sir, I understand you're frustrated. The ER is 2 floors, they can see you right away.
Do you know who I am? I gave $4 million to this building.
I hear you, but I can't move this patient.
Write a number, whatever it takes. I need this bed.
Put that away. I'm asking you calmly to let us do our jobs.
You're a nurse. You don't make that call.
On this floor, I do. Please, let's not do this.
I own this facility! You will do exactly as I say. Do not think for a second you matter. Get out of my sight right now!
The ICU never slept. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms, the air thick with antiseptic and quiet desperation. Nurses moved fast and said little, because on this floor, a wasted second was a stolen life. Yolanda Prescott had worked this unit for 6 years. At 31, she was the one the younger staff called when a vein collapsed, when a family broke down in the hallway, when a patient coded at 3 in the morning and nobody else knew what to do. She was the calm that held the room together. She was also 7 months pregnant. Her feet ached. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, grinding pain that started around hour 4 of every 12-hour shift, but she never mentioned it. She just pressed a hand to her belly between rooms, took a slow breath, and kept moving. Nobody on the floor knew much about her outside the hospital. She didn't talk about where she'd grown up. She didn't mention family. When people asked, she smiled and changed the subject. Nobody was supposed to know that the quiet nurse adjusting an IV in room 6 was the foster sister of a man named Damon Ricci. Ricci didn't attend charity galas or turn up in business magazines. He moved through the city the way a current moves under still water, invisible until he decided to break something. He ran the largest network in the Pacific Northwest that had no name and no file in any police database. He'd kept that world away from Yolanda for years, not out of shame, but because she'd asked him to, back when they were teenagers. "Let me just be normal," she told him once. He had honored that, always. But peace has enemies. The double doors at the end of the hallway slammed open at 2:14 p.m. Every head on the floor turned. Grant Wexford walked through them in a suit that cost more than most of the nurses made in 3 months. 44 years old, founder of 3 companies, a man who had never once heard the word no without consequences. Behind him, a nervous assistant pressed a folded cloth to Wexford's palm. A small cut, the kind you get from a broken glass at dinner. The kind that needs a bandage, not an ICU. Wexford didn't know that, or didn't care. "I need a doctor," he said, voice cutting over the monitors. "Not a resident, a real one." A young resident named Callum hurried over, hands raised. "Sir, this is critical care. Your assistant's injury really belongs in the ER, 2 floors down." Wexford grabbed his coat and shoved him aside. The floor stopped breathing. He started toward a room where a 67-year-old man was recovering from open-heart surgery, scanning for an empty bed, someone who'd simply do what he said. Yolanda stepped out of room 6. "Do you know who I am? I gave $4 million to this building. I'll have your badge pulled before your shift ends." "That's your right," Yolanda said, not moving. "You're still not coming through this hallway." Something in his face went cold. He pulled a leather card holder from his jacket and flipped it open toward Callum, still pressed against the wall. "Write a number, whatever it takes to move one of these patients. I don't care which one. I need this bed." Callum's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Put that away," Yolanda said. "Money doesn't decide which patients are stable enough to move. The man in 4 had open heart surgery 11 hours ago. He's not going anywhere for a hand cut." Wexford turned on her slowly. "You're a nurse," he said, making the word sound like an insult. "You don't make that call. On this floor, I do." What followed was loud and ugly. He called her incompetent, mocked her scrubs, her salary, her place. Junior nurses at the station stared at the floor in shame. Yolanda took every word without flinching, then turned toward the wall phone to call security. That was when he hit her. The sound was wrong for a hospital. Too sharp, too loud. His palm caught the side of her face with full force. "Maybe now you understand how this works," Wexford said, straightening his cuffs. Down by the exit stairwell, a tall man in a black coat had been watching the whole thing without moving. The shoving, the threats, the slap, the way her hands had gone to her belly. A small tattoo showed on the side of his neck, a wolf's eye, half open. He didn't reach for a weapon. He typed 4 words into his phone, sent them, and walked out the side door. Dr. Emerson Vale, chief of medicine, arrived 60 seconds later. 62 years old, silver-haired, a reputation for staying calm in a crisis. He surveyed the scene, Yolanda steadying herself against the counter, Wexford with his arms crossed, and made his decision in under 3 seconds. He chose wrong. Mr. Wexford. Vale crossed the floor with his hand out. I'm so sorry. Let's get you looked after immediately. He never once looked at Yolanda. Your nurse was aggressive and obstructed patient care, Wexford said. I defended myself. Vale nodded like he'd been told the weather forecast. He didn't check the cameras. He didn't ask the witnesses. He didn't look at the marks spreading across the face of the pregnant woman 10 feet away. He turned to her, voice flat. I'm going to have to let you go, effective immediately. Please surrender your badge and clear your locker. The shock landed somewhere behind her sternum, not from the words themselves, which she'd half expected the moment Vale walked in and didn't check on her first, but from the room full of people who'd watched a man slap a pregnant nurse and were now studying their shoes. 2 guards walked her out, not roughly, firmly like they'd been told to make it look official. She handed over her badge, emptied her locker into a paper bag, and walked the long corridor past the patients she'd cared for. The break room, the room where she'd once held a dying man's hand, because no family had come. Outside it was raining. She stood on the wet sidewalk and checked her phone. There was already an email from a law firm. Wexford was suing her for emotional distress and professional interference. She read it twice. Then she started walking. By the next morning, her card was declined at the grocery store. Her accounts were frozen. An eviction notice was taped to her door by the time she got home. She sat in the dark apartment, both hands on her stomach, breathing until the shaking stopped. She'd left her old life for something clean and earned, something that was only hers. 6 years, shift by shift, gone in an afternoon. Then she stood, went to the closet, moved a stack of boxes, and pulled out a fireproof case. Inside was a phone she charged once a year, just in case. Just in case had arrived. She dialed a number she'd memorized a decade ago. Damon Ricci answered on the first ring. He already knew. He'd been in the hallway. He'd seen the slap, seen her hands go to her stomach, seen the chief of medicine choose a donor over his best nurse. He'd walked out that side door, not because he didn't care, but because she'd made him promise years ago never to act unless she asked. He'd spent the last 22 hours waiting for the call. I need help, she said. That was all. You don't have to say anything else. His voice was the calmest it had ever been. Go to sleep. I'll handle it. He set the phone down on the glass table of his office, looked out at the city lights, and made 4 calls. Wexford found out at dinner, at a private club with leather chairs and a menu with no prices. He'd ordered 2 bottles of something obscene to celebrate a pregnant nurse getting walked out of a building he half-owned by donation. When he set his card on the tray, the waiter came back with the look of a man who wished he worked anywhere else. Declined. He called his banker. 6 missed calls already stacked on his phone. His stock had dropped 19% in 3 hours. His offshore accounts, 3 of them, chosen for their privacy, were empty, not withdrawn. Empty, like the money had never existed. Then his head of security got a text, read it, went pale, and walked out of the club without a word. Wexford sat alone with 2 untouched bottles and no way to pay for them. He spent the night trying to buy his way out. He knew names, dangerous ones, men who made problems disappear for important people. He met the first in a parking garage at midnight and slid a bag of cash across a car hood, along with what he'd found in his mailbox that evening. A black envelope, sealed in dark red wax, stamped with a wolf's eye. The man looked at it for a long moment, pushed the money back, and left without a word. The second didn't even sit down. The third, broken nose, a reputation for taking jobs nobody else would, looked at the seal, looked at Wexford, and said quietly, "You hit someone you shouldn't have touched. Nobody in this city takes this job, not for any price." Why? Because whoever sent that envelope doesn't negotiate. He collects. Wexford drove to his private airfield at 2 a.m. Jet, cash, a plan. Out of the country, somewhere without extradition, rebuilt from nothing. He was 50 feet from the stairs when headlights hit him. 3 black SUVs, materializing at the edge of the tarmac like they'd been parked there for hours. They had been. 6 men. No visible weapons, no raised voices. A bag over his head and he was moving. When they pulled the bag off, he was kneeling on cold marble in a room lit only at the far end of a long table, where a man sat with a cup of tea and an expression of total calm. The wolf's eye tattoo was clear on his neck. Damon Ricci set down his cup and looked at Grant Wexford the way a man looks at a problem he's already solved. "I have connections at the federal level," Wexford said, voice cracking. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Ricci slid a tablet across the table until it stopped at Wexford's knees. Full resolution security footage. Time-stamped. The shove, the shouting, the slap. Yolanda's hands going to her stomach. The guards walking her out. Vale nodding along like he'd been told good news. Wexford stared at it. "You thought she was alone," Ricci said, quiet enough that Wexford had to lean in. "You thought nobody was coming." He leaned forward. "She has me." A lawyer stepped out of the shadows with a stack of documents. Ricci laid out the terms without emotion. Every asset, the companies, the properties, the patents, the emergency cash already smoldering in a barrel in the corner. All of it transferred immediately into an irreversible trust for underprivileged single mothers in the city. Wexford sobbed through the signing, real tears, not guilt, but the particular grief of watching power leave your hands for good. They put the bag back over his head, drove 20 minutes, and pushed him out onto wet pavement. He rolled twice before he stopped, tore the bag off and looked up at an emergency entrance sign. The same hospital. The same lot where Yolanda had once stood in the rain holding a paper bag of her belongings. He sat there with nothing but the clothes on his back. Then the police cars came, because while he'd been sleeping in alleys that week, Ricci had already sent 10 years of his financial fraud records to 3 federal agencies. Tax evasion, embezzlement, wire fraud, documented and delivered anonymously. Wexford didn't run. There was nowhere left to go. Morning light came soft through the windows of a 7th-floor suite, flowers on the sill, the sound of a newborn breathing. Yolanda held her daughter against her chest and looked out at the city. The baby had her grandmother's nose, a full head of dark hair, and lungs that had already announced her to the entire floor. Damon stood near the door, hands folded, watching his niece with an expression Yolanda had never seen on him before. Something open, unguarded, human. He'd bought the hospital 4 months earlier, quietly, through 3 shell companies. The board hadn't known who owned it until the paperwork cleared. Then they knew. Dr. Vale had resigned shortly after, which hadn't mattered, since the new ownership was already processing his termination. He was employed 2 floors below now, not as a doctor. Housekeeping had been short-staffed. Yolanda heard the squeak of a mop bucket in the hallway and glanced up. Vale passed the open door, older looking than she remembered, eyes down. He looked in, saw her, looked away, and kept moving. She didn't call after him. She looked back down at her daughter's face instead. Damon crossed the room and stood by the bed, studying the baby, then his sister. "You good?" She laughed, small, real, tired. "Yeah, I'm good." He nodded once, like something he'd been carrying had finally been set down. Across town in a federal holding facility, Grant Wexford sat on a metal bench in an orange jumpsuit. The wealth was gone. The lawyers were gone. The investors, the board, the club friends who toasted him over champagne, all gone. He'd spent 44 years building a life where no was a word other people said. He understood now what happens when you're wrong about that. Yolanda kissed her daughter's forehead and breathed in the warmth of her. The storm was over. Not simply because a powerful man had fallen, though he had, completely, and not because a coward was mopping floors 2 stories down, though he was. It was over because she was here, in this room, her daughter breathing against her chest, and her brother standing quietly at the door, and the world outside had no claim on her anymore. She had spent her whole life fighting for something ordinary. She hadn't realized that sometimes the people who love you fight for it too. The quietest people in the room are never the weakest. They're just the ones who haven't decided to move yet.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. It will go a long way. See you in the next video.